Middle-earth might be the strangest functioning ecosystem fiction has ever built. Giant spiders the size of delivery vans. Fire demons sleeping beneath mountains. Eagles that carry passengers. Armies of orcs. And somehow, all of them coexist on the same map. So naturally, my brain went somewhere much stranger. What would actually happen if you dropped Earth's most dangerous land predator straight into all of that? Not a dragon, not a monster, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Before we let this animal loose in Tolkien's world, here's the resume. Some T-Rex specimens topped 10 tons and stretched past 40 feet. In a class of its own among everything that has ever hunted on land. Its skull was built like a battering ram wrapped in muscle, generating bite forces north of 57,000 newtons, enough to crumple a car door with one clamp of the jaw. That sounds terrifying, right up until you realize Mordor could end this animal without a single orc ever laying a claw on it. We'll get there. Back to the resume for a second though. Bite marks on fossilized bone show this animal routinely crunched straight through skeletons, grinding them into fragments barely bigger than gravel. Its senses matched the hardware. Hawk-level vision, a nose that rivaled scavenging birds, and an inner ear tuned to infrasound, the same deep frequency elephants use to talk to each other across miles. It didn't just see or smell a herd coming, it felt one, through the ground, before anything else caught wind of it. And no, despite one very confident study, this wasn't a scheming genius plotting ambushes like a chess grandmaster. Follow-up research put its brain power closer to a very large, very driven crocodile. Not stupid, just not exactly doing crossword puzzles either. Update the mental image while we're at it too. Skip the shrink-wrapped, all-teeth movie grin. Current consensus says it kept those teeth hidden behind scaly lips, like a lizard, which is somehow worse. And the rest of the skeleton backs up the reputation. Bones so overbuilt that healed fractures show up constantly. Proof this thing got hurt and just kept walking. Basically, the reptilian equivalent of shrugging off a car crash. So, this is an apex predator with an absurd bite force and a brain built for instinct over strategy. The obvious assumption is that dropping it into Middle-earth turns it into an unstoppable monster in a world that's already survived actual dragons. What's one prehistoric lizard going to do? Except survival was never really about how scary you are. It's calories, climate, terrain, and who else is hunting the same ground. And once you actually walk this animal through Middle-earth, region by region, being the toughest thing in the room stops mattering the second there's nothing to eat and nowhere to hide. For the sake of a fair fight, let's set this during the Third Age, the world of the books and films, and skip the earlier ages, where dragons could darken a valley with their wingspan and demonic balrogs would make a T-Rex look like a garden lizard. We'll drop it in on some random Tuesday. A surprise this size doesn't need a special occasion. Push this animal north, into the frozen wastes of the Forodwaith, and the old assumption was that it would simply freeze solid. T-Rex, after all, mostly lived somewhere warm and humid. Newer research complicates that picture. Massive-bodied animals like this one were likely gigantothermic. Their sheer bulk helped them retain heat, much like a furnace stays warm long after the fire has gone out. Tyrannosaur relatives have also turned up in fossil beds well inside the Arctic Circle. So freezing to death on day one probably isn't the real story here. Starving to death over the following weeks is. The Forodwaith is a nightmare of ice, jagged peaks, and old corrosive magic. It simply doesn't support the herds of massive prey. A 10-ton predator needs to keep its internal furnace fed. Cold wasn't the killer, an empty pantry was. Head south instead, into Mordor, and things get worse in a completely different way. On paper, Mordor already looks like a death sentence. It's a wasteland roughly the size of a small country, surrounded by mountains and covered in ash. An active volcano dominates the landscape and keeps the sky trapped in a permanent dusk. But the real problem is more specific than simply saying, it's bad there. T-Rex had feet built to absorb shock on soft, uneven ground. They were not designed to grip jagged, glassy volcanic rock. Every step could become a twisted ankle lottery. Then there's the air. T-Rex likely had an efficient bird-like respiratory system, with one-way airflow and air sacs extending through parts of its skeleton. That system helped it breathe with remarkable efficiency. But in Mordor, that advantage becomes a serious liability. Fill the air with volcanic glass and sulfur dioxide, and those particles could be pulled deep into the respiratory system. A mammal might filter out at least some of them before they travel that far. So the same respiratory system that helped make T-Rex efficient could work against it here. In Mordor, breathing itself might become one of the fastest ways to die. Assuming it somehow survived the terrain and the air, it would still have to deal with the neighbors. Sauron's forces in the Third Age are flesh and steel, not just a floating eye. Orcs, trolls, ringwraiths riding fell beasts the length of a school bus. One-on-one, my money's still on the Rex against most of this. A lone orc, or a smaller troll, isn't shrugging off a bite built to pulverize Triceratops' horn core. But Mordor doesn't offer one-on-one. It offers scorched, open ground with nowhere to stage an ambush. There are fell beasts that can rake it from above while staying safely out of jaw range. And there's a giant, unblinking eye that never really sleeps. It watches the whole wasteland for exactly the kind of large, unfamiliar movement a 10-ton reptile would generate. Even Shelob isn't a real option. She lives up in the mountains and is loaded with paralytic venom. And one snack doesn't fix a long-term food problem anyway. There's one exception worth mentioning. Nirn, the fertile stretch south of the main wasteland that actually feeds Sauron's armies. It's the closest thing to a livable pocket in the region, complete with a captive human population that would be tragically easy pickings for a hungry theropod. But tragically easy pickings is exactly the kind of thing that gets an organized hunting party sent after you. Great for the food problem. Historically terrible news for anyone's long-term survival plan. Nirn's idea of animal control comes with spears, not tranquilizer darts. Move west, out of Mordor's shadow, and Gondor looks a lot more promising at first glance. This is warm, Mediterranean-style territory, with mild winters and long summers. The landscape mixes grassland, river valleys, and forest. That gives a predator open ground to hunt and enough cover to disappear. The problem is Gondor itself. It holds some of Middle-earth's largest population centers, including Minas Tirith and Dol Amroth. A 10-ton reptile taking livestock near a kingdom this well-armed would not be tolerated for long. Stick to the emptier stretches of Gondor, away from the cities, and the human problem eases off, but a new one shows up immediately. There's nothing left worth eating. This animal evolved to demolish other giants. Triceratops-sized prey packed with meat. Gondor's wildlife tops out at deer, boar, and rabbits, maybe the occasional bear. Feeding a 10-ton body on rabbit-sized portions means hunting successfully several times before sundown, every single day, against prey quicker and more evasive than anything it ever grew up chasing. It's less a hunting ground and more a scenic diet that ends in starvation. Rohan looks like another death sentence. Except after dark, when the math flips a little. Climate isn't really the issue here. If this animal can survive freezing snaps further north, Rohan's bright, warm summers are no threat at all. The landscape is the issue. Rohan is one enormous rolling sea of open grassland, a biome that flatly did not exist when T-Rex was alive. Cretaceous North America had floodplains and conifer forest, not miles of unbroken grass with zero cover. An animal roughly the size of a school bus is not sneaking up on anything in an open field. And it's certainly not hiding from the Rohirrim. These riders spend their entire lives patrolling this exact terrain on horseback, hunting orcs and raiders. They're not looking for dinosaurs. But a giant animal picking off livestock in daylight isn't going unnoticed for long. A mounted, coordinated response is also one of the few things this predator has no good answer for. It's not so different from Earth's own Ice Age giants. Mammoths didn't lose to bigger predators. They lost to small, organized bands of humans who refused to stop showing up. Give those humans horses, and the math gets worse. Ignore the humans for a second, though, and Rohan's ecology isn't hopeless. Wide grassland tends to support big grazing herds, including cattle, oxen, and horses. There's also decent evidence that T-Rex could hunt at night. That matters because daytime grazers are slower, calmer, and less alert after dark. That's a real advantage, maybe the biggest edge this animal has anywhere on the map. But it still isn't enough to overcome open terrain with nowhere to hide, and cavalry actively looking for trouble. Push further west into Eriador, the region that holds the Shire, and it has one thing nowhere else on this tour does. Almost nobody around to stop it. By the late Third Age, Eriador is a mostly empty landscape. Old wars, plague, and brutal winters have hollowed it out. Only a few small, well-defended settlements remain, including the Shire and Rivendell. A predator this size would have little reason to approach them. Fewer people also mean fewer coordinated hunts, and the milder river lowlands to the south offer at least a plausible climate. Food is still scarce, deer, boar, and the occasional elk, but scarce and unmonitored beats abundant and heavily hunted. Eriador is also where you'd run into trolls, and this is genuinely worth slowing down for, because it flips the usual monster movie logic on its head. Picture the moment. A 12-foot troll, all stone gray muscle, hauling a hammer the size of an oil drum over its shoulder. On paper, that's the scarier animal in the room, and every instinct says bet on the bigger weapon. But weigh what a T-Rex skull is actually built for. It's not a fragile helmet protecting a brain. It's a fused, reinforced structure built to absorb violent impacts from struggling prey. Those animals could kick, gore, and slam a predator into the ground. Even then, the skull was built to take the punishment. A troll's hammer swing is one heavy, telegraphed hit. The T-Rex jaws evolved to survive repeated impacts during brutal struggles with prey. And it only takes one clean bite to end the fight. One clamp, straight through bone. The troll gets one swing. The T-Rex only needs one bite to land. Eriador also has wargs, oversized, disturbingly intelligent wolves that hunt in coordinated packs. Individually, one stands zero chance against something this size. Frankly, that's just embarrassing for the wolf. In a pack, their smartest move is simply to stay out of range. Conveniently, that describes how most of Eriador's remaining wildlife would react to this predator anyway. Mirkwood sounds almost like home turf on paper. Dense, warm, plenty of cover to hide in. It's actually the single worst environment on this entire map, and it's not really about the monsters living there. It's physics. A 40-foot rigid-spined biped carries a massive amount of rotational inertia. Think about how much effort it takes to pivot something that long and heavy, and how much clearance that takes. Mirkwood's canopy is so dense that it blocks out daylight almost entirely. Even the so-called known paths are choked with undergrowth. Some are barely wide enough for a party of hobbits to squeeze through in single file. There is almost no room to maneuver. That is bad news for a predator that cannot turn quickly or defend its flanks. And this forest is already full of threats. There are colonies of oversized, venomous spiders and an orc stronghold near the southern edge. Then there are the wood elves. They may be the toughest individual opponents on this entire tour. They are silent, fast, and lethal at a distance, long before anything gets close enough to bite. If one archer with a longbow can bring down an animal the size of a small building, this predator is in trouble. A slow-turning theropod tangled in thick undergrowth simply does not stand much of a chance. The Misty Mountains aren't any kinder. They're just dangerous in a completely different way. This is steep, vertical terrain that a bipedal predator this size was never built to navigate. The mountains are also home to a literal fire demon wrapped in armor. Then there are stone giants, too tough to fight and too inedible to hunt. Eagles nest along the cliffs as well. They've already tangled with airborne fell beasts. A giant, grounded, unfamiliar animal wandering through their territory probably would not be welcomed. More likely, it would be driven off. That assumes it survives the terrain long enough to be noticed at all. Loose scree, sheer cliffs, and narrow switchbacks are bad enough. For an animal this large, they could be disastrous. Its knees were never built for terrain like this. So if the famous locations are mostly a bust, where does this animal actually have a shot? Oddly, it's the places the movies barely mention. Rhûn, the far eastern region around its inland sea, quietly checks almost every box this predator needs. The sea keeps the surrounding climate stable. The land around it is fertile steppe and plain fed by a major river. And the region supports serious herds, cattle, horses, and something Tolkien describes as an oversized, heavily horned wild ox, notably larger than an ordinary one. Real aurochs, their closest historical equivalent, could weigh up to 1.5 tons, horns included. But T-Rex spent its entire life bringing down heavily armored giants like Triceratops. That was a herbivore whose entire head was basically a weapon. So bighorns were never really the problem. The bigger question in Rhûn is whether the Easterlings would tolerate a new apex predator raiding their herds. And chances are, they would not tolerate it any longer than the Rohirrim would. South of Gondor, Harad splits into two very different regions. Near Harad is mostly desert and rock, ruled by organized human factions. That combines several problems we've already seen. Far Harad might actually offer this animal a foothold, rather than leaving it as another doomed animal just passing through. Picture it. The predator moves low through jungle cover, something it has never really had the luxury of before. Its jaws stay closed, lips hiding the weapons underneath. For once, it has room to be patient. Miles away, a herd shifts its weight. The ground itself begins to hum with it. The rhythm is so low that most ears would never register it as sound. But that same inner ear is tuned to exactly that kind of frequency. It can lock on before sight or smell ever gets the chance. Every other region on this map asked this animal to be something it wasn't. A mountain climber, a stealth hunter in open grass, a creature built to breathe volcanic ash or survive permanent ice. Far Harad is different. For the first time, it only asks T-Rex to be what it already evolved to be. A heat-tolerant, calorie-hungry apex predator facing prey actually worth the fight, in a landscape that finally stops working against it. So, could a T-Rex actually thrive in Middle-earth? In almost every place the movies love to show us, the answer is probably no. Not because T-Rex isn't dangerous, it absolutely is. But danger was never the real question. Survival comes down to calories, terrain, and who else already controls the ground around you. And somehow, the most forgotten corner of the map may be the only place that gives this animal a fair chance. That's the strange part. We love asking which creature would win in a fight. But sometimes, the fight is decided long before anything throws the first bite. Sometimes the better question is much simpler. What is there to eat? Because if a 10-ton predator with a bone-crushing bite can still lose to geography, size clearly isn't everything. If you enjoyed looking at Middle-earth from a different angle, leave a like and subscribe. There are plenty more strange matchups to explore. And the next one isn't about size at all. It's a completely different kind of survival story.